Coming to you from 4,200 feet in the hills of Oregon, we have another bonus installment of the MOA broadcast. This is, again, not a full-length episode, bit of a short, if you will, but I've been trying to cover some of the more common topics and questions that I get or that come up in outdoor forums or discussions and so forth. Today we're going to be talking about fire starting, and we're not going to get into the mechanics of actually starting a fire, but rather the tools that you use to do it. Now, and again, this is not a new conversation. This has been had many times over the years. You should never have just one method, though, in my opinion, especially if you're going to be in the wilderness. You should have multiple different ways to start a fire, especially given the severity of your situation. These are called redundancies, obviously. There's the old saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. You never want to have just one way of doing something or one particular tool, especially when it's something as critical as starting a fire. Now, if you spend all your time in the city and going around town, you probably don't ever have this come up. But that being said, you should still be prepared because you never know when that situation may arise. A lot of the people that find themselves or have found themselves in emergencies never thought that was going to happen, and so they didn't prepare. How many people do you think wake up each day and think, I'm going to find myself in a life or death 72-hour survival situation in the snow or in the mountains or in the wilderness or on the water today? The vast majority, I would be surprised if anybody woke up and thought, that's probably what's going to happen to me today. That's just not usually how it goes. So anyway, before we get off on that tangent, the two primary methods we're talking about today, are really the primary method, is a ferro rod. That's short for ferrocerium rod. Now, for those of you not familiar, this is a unit that I manufacture. We'll try and get, but I'm not trying to sell anything today. That's a separate discussion. This is a hollow aluminum storage handle with a cap that comes off, so you got a watertight storage compartment, and there's a compass in the cap for rudimentary directionality and taking directions and such. And then we have a replaceable ferro rod. The screw comes out, the set screw, and you can replace the ferro rod if you ever wear it down. Now, why is a ferro rod so important? Well, unlike matches or a lighter, you can tell exactly how much life, I shouldn't say matches, you do obviously, but unlike a lighter, and some other methods of starting a fire, you can tell exactly how much life you have left in your ferro rod by looking at the size of it, the condition of it, and so forth. I have had on multiple occasions, even Bicks, which are good lighters. I have had, the disposable ones are almost always the best. I've had some very expensive ones between $50 and well over $100 of the butane torch type lighters. All of them have crapped out of me sooner or later, so I don't even look at them anymore. I look at them more as a novelty. If it's there and it works, great, but I don't anticipate it being in working condition if and when I ever need it. That's not a knock on any manufacturer, but I have just had poor luck. And like I said, I've bought a number of them. I've spent hundreds of dollars over the years on some of the best brands. All of them failed me sooner or later, and never in like an emergency, just around the shop or the backyard or whatever. So it is what it is. The ferro rod is a great tool because, number one, you know exactly how much life you have left. And it forces you, if you use a ferro rod primarily to start your fires, even if you have access to matches and lighters and other fire starting equipment, it forces you to keep your skill set sharp. Okay? If you can go out there and start a fire, that's my go-to method almost always when starting a fire anywhere, except maybe in the wood stove that I heat with. If you can go out and start a fire by creating a tinder bundle and then creating tinder and kindling and so forth, and do it with just the sparks from a ferro rod, then once you have that down pat and you keep that skill set sharp, you'll have no problem starting a fire with matches or a lighter, because the steps are really the same other than the ignition method. Whether you're using a ferro rod, matches, lighter, whatever else, you have to create a tinder bundle, then you have tinder, then you have kindling, and then you have fuel wood. You may call those different things, but that's just the basic progression. That's how I label it in my head. The difference is you have to be a little cleaner and a little tighter to make sure your tinder bundle will ignite with just the sparks from a ferro rod. So that forces you to continually work on and refine your skills. And if you are used to being able to go out there and start a fire anytime you want or need to with a ferro rod, then if you have to do with matches or a lighter or a torch, it'll be a walk in the park. So that's kind of the idea. The other thing is this. I have had even Bic lighters of the disposable kind, And I've had a number, what are they, peanut and cricket and other different types of lighters. I've gone through tons of them over the years. Testing here in the shop, in videos, on the trail, and so forth. I've had them all fail me at one time or another. They're not all junk, but I've had them fail me. Either they get busted, they get wet, they seem to be particularly susceptible to water and ice. I've dropped them on stone and had them break and burst. I always have lighter and matches with me whenever I go in the woods. When I carry matches, which is always, I always have one of these little guys too, which is something that I also manufacture. It's a match safe. I have these in OD green and black. You don't have to buy one from me, and I'm not trying to sell it, but I'm showing you this is a watertight capsule. And yes, you can strike anywhere match on the knurling of that match safe. So that's a great tool. You can put medication, money, matches, whatever it is you think will be useful in your environment in that little waterproof capsule. Put a lanyard on there and either tie it to something or wear it around your neck or whatever. A lot of times I'll drop it in one of my cargo pockets and tie it to my belt or to a belt loop. But anyway, the thing is once you become proficient with a ferro rod, doing it with a matches or a lighter is a walk in the park. And unlike all of those things, you can tell a ferro rod will work whenever it's wet. I've done videos, they're on my channel, on the Gear Convoy YouTube channel, where I've literally soaked the ferro rod overnight in water, pulled it out, and lit a fire with it. Okay? So this isn't really a question of should you have one or the other. It's a question of having both and being proficient with both. Because really, if you can't start a fire with a ferro rod, you will probably be challenged doing it with matches or a lighter. And if you can't do it with matches or a lighter, you're probably dead if all you have left is a ferro rod. So, it doesn't boil down to this is the only way. But a ferro rod is a great tool, and again, it keeps your skill sharp because those skills are perishable. If you only pull out those skills once or twice a year when you go camping or hiking or you do the family barbecue in the backyard or whatever it is, you are going to get weak, and you're going to rely on having things like lighter fluid, things like having newspaper or cardboard and so forth. If you ever find yourself in an emergency situation, you are going to be in real trouble because out in the woods, you're not going to have newspaper. You're not going to have a torch. You're probably not going to have maybe even dry tinder of any kind. You may have to create it by splitting wood to get to the inside or so forth. So really, the concept of a ferro rod is it's also a bit of a philosophy. It helps you to keep your skill sharp and also to make sure you're always thinking about, whenever I go backpacking, what I'll do is during the day, especially if I'm in like the Pacific Northwest. I used to live closer to the gorge near Portland, and everything is just wet there. So along the day while I was hiking, when I saw dry, I would always be looking around me. And whenever I saw dry tinder, either hanging from a tree or a piece of wood that was off the ground that I knew I could get dry tinder or shavings from, I would grab it and put it in my pocket. That helped to dry it out even further. And then whenever I got to camp at the end of the day, I had a ready supply of wood or dry tinder that I could use to get my fire going. But that's the point. We get really sloppy when we don't use our skills and survive by our skills, so they're perishable, and then when we find that we need them, we're in trouble. On my radio broadcast, and the MOA broadcast, the show, I talk every week almost about people that die in the wilderness because they weren't prepared or they just got sloppy, whatever the case may be. And you would be surprised, I share probably 20, 30 or more stories a year of things like that happen. There are dozens, if not more, that I read through that are where people are either die or they have to get rescued. And a lot of them share a similar theme. The simplest things trip people up. And in a lot of cases, exposure is one of the biggest killers. Falls and exposure are two of the biggest killers in the wilderness. And a lot of people that go out there, they'll even have the right tools and gear and equipment to get a fire going, to build shelter and so forth, but they don't know how to use it. So just as important as making your choice is practice with it. And that to me is where the superiority of the ferro rod comes in, because if you can go out there, and I've got videos on my channel where I do, and I'm not trying to brag, I'm just saying this is the point, is I'm trying to practice what I preach. And I've gone out there and started fires in the rain. I've started fires with materials I pulled out of a 5-gallon bucket of water. The knife, the wood, and the ferro rod or whatever else have been soaking in water. And the point is, it forces you to practice, and then you also know what's going to go wrong. If you know what's going to go wrong, you can anticipate on how to do the job right. And that's really what it all boils down to. So it's not just a question of ferro rod or matches or lighter. Bring all three. I do. I have matches in my little match safe, and I'll have a ferro rod, and I'll have one or two little mini Bic disposable lighters, one of which I'll keep in a little Ziploc bag, along with some cotton balls or some jute twine that's been soaked in wax. And that way, if I do fall in the water, which has happened, you have a completely dry source of tinder and your fire starting stuff ready to go. So there you go, something to think about, and hopefully gave you some information you may or may not have had or stimulated your thinking. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Stay safe out there, folks.